Hey there, folks. I'm Eric Metaxas, and we call this the Eric Metaxas Show because it's a show, and I'm Eric Metaxas. I know a lot of you already figured that out. Today, by the way, is Tuesday, the 8th, no, sorry, the 5th of August. So I am really tickled because right now I get to talk to someone whom I have admired, whose work I've admired. She's a journalist. Her name is Emerald Robinson. She's the host of a show called The Absolute Truth on Lindell TV. You know how much I love Mike Lindell. Emerald Robinson, thrilled to have you on the program. Welcome.
Likewise, it's so good to talk with you, Eric. I feel the same about you.
Well, you're very kind, and you have been brave and ahead of the curve on many things. The other day, you posted something on X, which I guess reading it, it flattered me a little bit because what you said was, and I hadn't thought of this really. So it's interesting that you're on this as you are. You said a lot of the MAGA, quote unquote, MAGA influencers have been silent, and a lot of these people are friends of mine and people that I admire seriously, but that some of them have been silent on certain issues, certain hot button issues, issues which you and which I take to be as important as it gets for saving America from death. Not overstating things, folks. There's no hyperbole here. Okay, what are those issues?
Well, of course, it's
What
the electronic voting machines for one.
Well, I was just going to answer that question
Oh,
and then ask you to comment on it. But you mentioned, yes, the stolen election. How many MAGA influencers didn't want to get into whether the election was stolen? And from the beginning, I had the opinion, wait a minute, wait a minute. If I think the election was stolen, forget about it if it was stolen. If I think it might have been stolen, I have a moral obligation to talk about it and to ask everyone to get to the bottom of it, because you can't have an America unless you talk about that. A lot of folks didn't want to talk about that. Whether the vaccines were harmful, a huge issue that a lot of people said, well, we don't get into that. Whether COVID was, created in a lab, was a bioweapon created by the communist Chinese, whether January 6th was an inside job, a Fedsurrection. A lot of these issues, people that we would consider allies in the war, we're silent about them. You have been the opposite of silent. I have tried to speak about them, and those are just a few. But let's start there. How do you think we're doing now? Because at least I'll say I think we're doing better. That I knew this information by the grace of God eventually would come out, and it is coming out. The Russia hoax, the stolen election, the harm of the COVID vaccines, what J6 really was, and on and on and on. So let's start there. How do you think we're doing?
well, you're right in that more people are willing to speak out, right? Which is a good thing. I'm glad that more voices are talking about these issues as far as electronic voting machines, the origins of COVID, the problems with the vaccines. I think the problems with the vaccines for a long time was very taboo because people were worried about the fact that it was done via Operation Warp Speed under the first Trump administration. The mandates weren't, let's be clear on that, but the development of the jabs. But here's my thing, Eric. They're talking about it because it's safe to do so. I don't think people suddenly got more courageous, perhaps, or that they, sorry, sometimes I worked in newsrooms, so grown a pair. I think that it's just a little bit safer and it's not so taboo anymore. But I'm glad that it's not so taboo, that there's been more information come out. And a lot of that is due to people like you, right, refusing to back down and just keeping the drumbeat of this is a problem. We're going to lose our constitutional republic if we don't investigate what happened in 2020, because it's obvious that there was blatant cheating, right? And we now know more. And if we don't talk about the COVID mandates or where it came from, and a lot of people with the COVID vaccines or excuse me, with the COVID origins are scared to really dive into the COVID origins, not because as it relates to China, because we're on the right, at least we're a little more comfortable about talking about CCP infiltration and their unrestricted warfare than, say, the left, right? But because it implicates our own government. Dr. Fauci, Dr. Ralph Barrick, and the kind of gain of function we've been funding. So I think that's where people get uncomfortable, and perhaps because of our own bio uh, warfare efforts and our own bioweapons program. But in saying that, I'm glad that people are getting more comfortable, because the average person who doesn't follow these niche topics as closely as you and I do are getting an opportunity to hear more about it. And I think that's only going to increase in coming days as it relates particularly to the stolen election in 2020 and how our elections have been problematic for years before that. I think that they've done a good job. I would like to see it go a little bit faster, of course, because I understand that we're coming up on midterms and Democrats hope to flip the balance of power. And if they do, then it's going to really make any of these efforts much more difficult as far as transparency and being effective. But I think in rolling out Russiagate in the way that they have, that Tulsi Gabbard has, I just wish it happened a little bit sooner, is effectively laying the groundwork for Americans who have not been where we are in this space for so many years to understand, okay, there's major corruption. And it makes it easier to understand then that that same kind of corruption exists in our elections. And of course, they had no problems working with foreign entities and foreign governments to essentially overthrow our election process and put in an illegitimate president.
Well, I mean, I guess folks who listen to me on this program have heard me talk about this a lot, but I don't think people understand when you talk about things, I mean, words can sometimes just be words. You say, oh, it's a scandal. Oh, it's one of the worst scandals in our hit.
Mm-hmm.
No, 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 no. That's like, if you say, if your children are raped and murdered and you say, oh, this is one of the worst crimes we've had. You'd say, what, one of the worst crimes. It doesn't get more horrible and more existential than rape and murder in your family. And so there's a sloppiness when we say, oh, it's a scandal. It's like Watergate. No, nothing compares. What we're talking about is destroying our nation. What we're talking about is a concerted effort, I mean, on various fronts, which we'll get into, to take our sovereignty from us, to destroy we the people, to say we the people do not have a voice. These elites are going to make decisions for us. But I think really, Emerald, I mean, I keep referring to the fact that I'm working on a book on the American Revolution right now. And it's interesting because when you see how we came into being 250 years ago, you see who we are and what we need to get back to. This idea, this wild idea that we would govern ourselves, that no one would govern us. No government's going to govern us. We, the people, we are the government. We elect representatives. Civics has not been taught over the decades. And so the only way all of this could have happened is for enough people not to quite understand what is the difference between us, for example, and Germany or France or England or Canada, to kind of think we're all sort of the same. We're not sort of the same. We really have some radical ideas at the heart of who we are. And what you and I and many others have been talking about is how there has been a concerted effort to end the founders' vision as we have in the Declaration and the Constitution, and they almost got away with it.
You're absolutely right. And I love that you're writing a book on the American Revolution. I have a 9-year-old, so we're very much in it and talking about it with him in school. And it brings back so much for me, and especially in this moment when we are fighting for our constitutional republic, because let's be honest, that's what we're doing. And I actually live near Charlottesville, Virginia. And I live on a property that used to be part of Thomas Jefferson's father's farm. So it's really nice. I feel the spirit of 1776 right here at home every day. And it's been very inspirational to me. That's when I left DC, that's where I went to.
We're going to go to a break here. Folks, don't forget, we're doing a fundraiser, Food for the Poor. Go to metaxastalk.com, metaxastalk.com. You'll see the banner at the top of the page. We'll be right back with Emerald Robinson. Welcome back, talking to Emerald Robinson. She is the host of The Absolute Truth at lindelltv.com. So, Emerald, what we're talking about ultimately is everything, right? We're talking about this idea that we've had a nation for 250 years that has been unlike any nation in the history of the world. And it's my thesis that most Americans in the last, say, 50 years, we have slid away from understanding the radical nature, this gift that we have given to us by God through the founders, that we can govern ourselves. And we've slid away from it. And there's profound cynicism in the Beltway, in the Uniparty, in the deep state. They don't really believe this stuff anymore. And so I think many Americans are waking up to it. And all these issues that you and I and others have been talking about are at the heart of it. Can we actually have an election? So I want to talk to you about all of this, but let me, and I want to ask you where do you think we are now? But first, let me ask you, how do you feel? Because I know that on X, you've been very vocal saying that people haven't been doing enough. Where are the arrests? How do you feel about where we are with that right now, as of today, Tuesday, August 5th?
As of today, Tuesday, August 5th, there are still no arrests. Now, I am hearing that that could change very soon, but that's what we have to have in order to have accountability. Because as you said, we're losing our constitutional republic, and it's been decades in the making. It was on purpose to distract people from paying attention to the civic process, to make sure they weren't educated about our civic process, right? As foreign governments bribed some of our key officials, infiltrated our institutions, and permeated the very heart of our constitutional republic. So we have to have actual arrests. I will say, on what I can say, there are some really good moves going on behind the scenes. I just don't think it's happening fast enough. I'll just point to some public statements, say from General Michael Flynn, who did note that there is a report, an extensive intelligence community report that looks into the 2020 election. But not just that, it looks into what happened in the 2020 election, but also how they did it and how it's been happening in other elections. It's extensive. And there was a fight in the intelligence community over what to put in it, as we saw with the report that Ratcliffe did back in 2021, right, related to Chinese interference in the election then. He didn't put everything that was supposed to be in there because there was a fight about it in the IC. There's been something similar. But from what I've heard, everything has been left in that report for President Trump. And even President Trump himself said recently that people will get to find out more, that they will see more, and that there will be some public disclosures. So that's movement in the right direction, because the intelligence on this is so deep and detailed, and people didn't really know how our elections were being run, okay? And it doesn't look good for our intelligence community. So what people are about to find out, Eric, is that America's voting machines are rigged by foreign governments. They're going to find out that the FBI and the CIA didn't just not do anything about it, but they suppressed and prosecuted anyone who stopped the rigging of the machines or tried to tell people what is going on. You're about to find out that Venezuelan narco-terrorists essentially own our voting machines. And I'm going to tell you some breaking news that happened on that front. Because I know that sounds so out of left field. It sounds like it's so crazy. But let me point you to the Southern District of Florida, where yesterday in the Miami Herald, a story broke that the feds down there in the Southern District of Florida that are prosecuting the Smartmatic bribery case that relates to the Philippines added a filing. And in this filing, they said that one of the four Smartmatic executives, this is the voting machine company that originated under Chavez in Venezuela, that then got sold in, the software got sold and purchased. There's all these, acquisitions that happened that relates to Dominion, Sequoia, ES&S, all the voting machines, right, somehow have touched each other. One of the four executives that have already been indicted, in a filing yesterday, they added that this executive had bribed the top election official in Venezuela by giving her a house with a pool in order to try to massage the relationship after the rigged 2017 election in Venezuela. Okay, these people were living in Davie, Florida. There is so much cross-pollination between Smartmatic voting machines and these people and the other voting machine companies in our elections here in the United States. And key figures in our political operations here in our own country. There are people at the very highest level that have been bribed and corrupted by foreign governments.
Can
And
you
that
name
is
names? I
the,
mean, that's a big thing when you say that, and I don't doubt it at all. But are you at
yeah,
liberty to name names?
I can't at this point, but that will come out in the next couple months, I believe.
But can you tell us when you say at the top levels, you're talking about governors of states?
I'm talking more like State Department, some influential donors, things like that.
Okay, so Emerald, does it get bigger than this?
I don't think it does. And it's
No.
not it's not just our country, Eric, and I think that's why such the caution, right? This could have, look at what we found out from USAID. And again, that's laying the groundwork for explaining to the American people what's been happening in our elections. You have to remember, USAID is essentially like the CIA slush fund, right? We've essentially established that with the Doge efforts to promote transparency there. USAID was paying to put Smartmatic voting technology in countries like Bosnia and Herzegovina, um, the Philippines, right? The Philippines, where this indictment, where this case from the Southern District of Florida relates to, and President Trump. Nobody really caught this. I'm playing this on my show today at noon and 8, The Absolute Truth at 8 p.m. on LindellTV.com. When President Trump met with the president of the Philippines a couple weeks ago in the Oval Office, he brought up the rigged elections. He tied it to Obama, to Russiagate. And he looked at that president from the Philippines and he's like, he knows a little something about dirty countries or something to that effect and rigged elections. That was very pointed. President Trump's well aware of what Smartmatic did in the Philippines. Um, it doesn't go any deeper. It doesn't get any bigger than this, Eric, because it relates to everything else that happens in our government, right? Why we get mass invasions of terrorists, right, and bad actors, Tren de Aragua, Iranian terrorists, with the border that Biden opened up. That would have never been opened if there hadn't been a rigged election. It comes down to everything we see with the spending, the massive spending, right? It all goes back to not having secure elections
Well, look,
and
we
foreign
know,
infiltration.
I mean, on the one hand, it's complicated. On the other hand, it's simple. There are
Right.
enemies of our country. There are people out there, many of them within our own government. They are globalists. They will ally themselves with Muslim terrorists. They will ally themselves with communist Chinese.
Right.
They are simply, they'll ally themselves with whomever in order to end American sovereignty. Again, the idea that there is a nation of people where we govern ourselves, where we're a beacon of liberty to the world. There are people that are enemies of that. So I guess the first question is, why are they enemies of that? In other words, why are there people within our deep state who would ally themselves with our enemies against the founders' vision of America, against America itself, really?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. First, of course, is money. You have to understand that you got cartel and CCP money being flooded to these people via NGOs or other indirect bribes. Um, and then there is just ideological. Some of these people were indoctrinated and flipped, whether it was in, their educational institution or just along the way as they worked in certain countries and worked in intelligence. It's very odd to me, and I don't understand it because I am a red, white, and blue bleeding patriot. You know what I mean? Absolutely love America. I can't imagine being seduced by another government, but it's interesting. I'll see some people, operatives who spend a lot of time in, say, China, communist China, and you would think, what on earth would be seductive about communist China? But because they come from more of an elitist mindset, they come back and say, wow, there's no crime. There's so much control,
Yeah.
right?
There
They
was
say,
very little
wow, it's
crime
so
in Nazi
organized.
Germany, at least, you know. Well, look, we'll be right back, folks, talking to Emerald Robinson. Don't go away. Welcome back. I'm talking to Emerald Robinson. You can find her at The Absolute Truth, which airs on lindelltv.com. So, Emerald, we're talking about a lot of stuff, but I guess in the last 4 years, a lot of people woke up. I mean, I was waking up finally in 2016 when I came out for
Mhm.
Trump. The blowback I got from a lot of my conservative buddies and a lot of evangelical Christians was stunning to me. I thought, what am I missing? You know, like what have I missed here, folks? And so it was a process. When the 2020 election was stolen, or when it seemed to me that it was likely stolen, I thought, wait a minute, this isn't believable. I can't live in a country where it's possible for people to wonder whether the election was an actual election. We can't have that, can we? I mean, it's one thing if a lot of dumb, ignorant people want to vote for Joe Biden and elect him. On some level, I don't have a problem with that. I mean, I have a big problem with it, but I say, well, if he was legitimately elected, okay, we deserve it. But when I actually doubt whether he was elected, and then I am told, shut up, don't bring this up. So something has happened in the last 4 or 5 years where a lot of folks, you and me and Mike Lindell and people said, wait a minute, wait a minute. The horror, which we're sort of talking about a little bit, is how there are many people who agreed with us on a lot of stuff, but they weren't willing to go there. I remember I was at an event and Mike Pompeo was at the event. And as far as I
Mhm.
knew, Mike Pompeo, like Mike Pence, Christian brother. And I asked him pretty gingerly, I didn't want to put him too much on the spot, but give him an opportunity. And I said something along the lines of, there are a lot of Americans who have serious doubts about the election that we just had. And I asked the question, how can you have a nation when we, the people, aren't actually sure whether we're governing ourselves? Isn't this an existential crisis? And I'm sorry to say his answer was so diplomatic. He clearly didn't want to be on the record as even implying that, yes, maybe the election was stolen. That's when, about 5 years ago, I thought, oh, the problem really is bigger than I thought, because here we have somebody who
Mhm.
was in the first Trump administration, somebody who is very public about his Christian faith, who is giving what I read as absolutely the wrong answer. And that's when I began, to understand the depth of the horror. And I know I'm certainly behind you and others in figuring it out.
I don't think you're that far behind. I mean, I of course started realizing, particularly with Mike Pence, that he wasn't the person he portrayed himself because I was there on the White House grounds, right? No one else would have seen that. But being there, interacting with his staff, seeing exactly who his staff was, like Josh Pitcock, who was married to his first chief of staff, who was married to Catherine Seaman, who worked directly for Peter Strzok. And it was obvious that there was a mole in the VP's office. His staff was so subversive to the first Trump administration. And they were they were the ones when Ukraine the Ukraine impeachment hoax happened. You had Jennifer Williams from Vice President Pence's office testifying, and I identified him just because I was there, right? And I had to interact with them, and the way they treated me, I just knew something wasn't right. And actually being there and shaking his hand and talking to him, I realized this is not the man that I've seen on TV. So that's the only reason, I would say I was ahead. And then in 2020, I didn't realize our elections were as bad as they were. But you know who did know? You know who did know? Was Mike Pompeo. And there is a lot more that will come out there. But I can tell you this, I can say, when he works for Fox, right? He was briefed on a lot of this information that is now being investigated behind the scenes. He got an early briefing when he was at Fox News because Fox was in litigation. And as soon as he heard a few names in that briefing, he calls up Paul Ryan and they shut it down. And the Fox settled almost immediately after that. Pump
Say this again so I'm clear. You're saying that when Mike Pompeo got what information? I wasn't.
information on the 2020 election and how it was stolen and the actors involved and the apparatus that exist to allow for the steal in 2020. He was briefed by certain people, and he listened, and then he heard a few names that were involved in the briefing, and he made a call to Paul Ryan, and then they shut down the briefing, and then Fox News settled their lawsuit pretty quickly after that with the voting machine company.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And when I think of people like our friend Mike Lindell, who has been a total hero, a warrior, an absolute warrior out there. When I think of him, I think of General Flynn. There's some people that have caught hell because they have stood firmly. And there are a lot of others that said, well, let's see how it goes. And again, there's a continuum. And I always say, because I wrote my book on Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I have clarity on how does evil take over? Well, there are some people at the top who are ideologues. They worship the devil openly, but there are tons of people down the line who say, you know what, I didn't want any trouble, or some money was offered to me, or you know what, I want to keep my power because I can use it for good, so I'll keep my mouth shut right now. We all make these calculations, and that's really how evil takes over. We're going to go to a break, folks. Plenty more with Emerald Robinson. Please don't forget our friends in Central Texas. They're still struggling. We need your help. Go to metaxastalk.com. That's the website, metaxastalk.com. You'll see the banner Help Texas at the top. Please help us. We just got a couple days left, and it is urgent. Thank you. Welcome back. We're talking to our friend Emerald Robinson. Emerald, we're talking about some heavy stuff here. This is heavy stuff. But let's remind ourselves where we are. I knew, because of my faith in the God of the Bible, that if you do the right thing, in the end, the truth comes out. Reality wins over fantasy and lies. And we are finally getting there. I think that when Trump was miraculously saved from death, it was a sign to everybody. It's like God has chosen to deliver us. We deserve to go into the abyss, to the ash heap of history, but God, that's not God's will for America. And so I have hope, and a lot of the things that have been coming out have given me hope. Do you have a sense that we're going to get more information about what actually happened on January 6th, for example?
I think so. I think it's the Russiagate, then I think it's elections, and then I think we will get to January 6th, because you're kind of doing it in order of what happened, right? You're laying it all out from 2016, and January 6th is sort of the last piece of that. And to speak about the hope, because I think sometimes, yes, it can get very heavy, and I'm often accused of that because I just lay it out there like it is. But I do that because I have faith in God, right? And I do believe ultimately all things work for our good. And I believe that He calls us to speak the truth. And that's what has helped me persist through all of this, through, getting canceled and everything. Because in the end, I can only do what God allows me to do. And I was talking to an operative who is someone that I respect. He's a good American, amazing American, deserves the Medal of Freedom. Probably will never get it, but deserves it. And has worked on a lot of this. And I asked him, I said, how do you think this is going to turn out? Because if it doesn't turn out well, right, it's going to be really bad for some people, really bad. It's bad for America in general, but it's going to be really bad for the people who were willing to speak out and who tried to raise the red flag, who conducted investigations, et cetera. And he said, you know what? We're going to win. I know it. We're going to win. He said, we're on the right track. So that is very hopeful. I think that as part of healing our constitutional republic, there has to be a reckoning for January 6th. These people are still struggling. So many of them, they haven't been made whole, right? Their lives were utterly destroyed. Many lost their families, marriages were destroyed. They're not getting those back, many of them. It's hard to get jobs still. They're living with this every day. I don't know any more explicit information about January 6th. I'm much more read in on, the other two issues, but I do believe in looking at the way they're laying everything out that yes, that will ultimately come. And it needs to come. Like I said, for full accountability and for the full healing of our constitutional republic and to get us back on track.
Well, it's interesting because part of what's involved is we need revival in America. There, apart from God, you don't get America to begin with. Again, because I'm writing this book on the revolution. I mean, I've always known this, or I've known this for quite a while, but I'm seeing it in detail that without a quorum of significant Christians like John Adams at the top of the list, you do not get America. You cannot have a free constitutional republic, self-governing as we have had it, without at its heart devoted Christians. Now, you cannot mandate or legislate Christian faith, but if you don't have Christian faith, you can't have all this other stuff. So going forward, there's a lot that has to happen. I mean, it's not just about, revealing the evil. You have to have people who understand what is the good, how our country is supposed to work, what is God's will for us in governing ourselves, and all of that kind of stuff. And so I'm hopeful for a general reset. I mean, I think it's happening on many, many levels. I mean, on some level, I think we have to repeal the sexual revolution. I mean, the horror of what has happened from the 1960s on, broken families, and all of this, of course, leads to everything else. I mean, all this stuff is related. Let's just talk for a moment about the Russia hoax, because that's where it starts, right? What happened with Hillary Clinton's campaign and Obama doing what they did in 2016, most Americans, including most conservatives and most Trump lovers, still don't understand the magnitude of it. They say this is one of the worst scandals in our. Are you kidding me? This is like putting a bullet in the head of Uncle Sam. Yeah. This is the murder of America by elites who clearly hate the idea of the founders' vision of America. They've got some other idea, but the magnitude of it absolutely staggers me. And I guess I want to say that I don't believe people are prepared for what is going to come out. I mean, when you see some of these people being arrested and I think there are a lot of people that they're not prepared. And I think the mainstream media is going to melt down. They're in the process. They're beginning to melt down because truly, truly, they cannot handle the truth. They're going to freak out. I don't know what they're going to do.
Well, they know they're complicit in telling the lie. I sat in those rooms. We all knew what was going on. Some people, there are very few people in that room that were just dumb. Let's take the White House press corps, for example. Just that group of people, which is supposed to be the elite of Washington press, right? Political press. I mean, there's a few of them that are dumb enough to buy into it, that are just so ideologically, and just not bright. I mean, maybe 30% of them, okay? It's a pretty small percentage, 20 to 30%. The rest of them, Eric, saw everything I saw, and they made their choices, whether it was because they were ideologically Marxist. There's many of those in that group, sure. Or if it was just ambition, and they knew that's what it would take to get ahead and get the network contract, because I had a couple of them explicitly tell me that themselves. And they would say, look, you're never going to get on, first it was CBS. And I said, well, I don't care. I don't want to be on CBS. This was when I was at OAN. And then when I moved to Newsmax, I said, well, you're never going to get Fox asking those questions. And I'm like, it's okay, because they've thrown me out pretty quickly anyway. But the press has a right. And when they look at people that tell the truth and who wouldn't go along with the narratives that perpetuated Russiagate, they're so sheepish. They actually almost defer to the dynamics. I love nonverbal communication as much as I love verbal communication. I'm a real nonverbal geek. The way they would their body language around me or someone else who, didn't participate in their lies, they know. They're very sheepish.
Okay, folks, we'll be right back. I'm talking to Emerald Robinson. Welcome back. I'm talking to Emerald Robinson. Emerald, the problem is we're talking about everything, and the problem is everything we're talking about is so important, but at least we're getting started here. Um, at the heart of everything we're talking about is, I've always said, it's why I wrote my book, Letter to the American Church. How does evil take over? How did evil take over in Germany? It's not because everybody signs up to worship Satan. Some do for the power, for the raw power. Others are just willing to look the other way. Others are willing to say, well, you know what? I'm not going to speak up right now. I had a pastor, I'll never forget this. I won't mention his name, but I remember a significant pastor with a big radio program saying, boasting almost like, well, I didn't speak up about the stuff that could get me canceled, the stuff that you, Emerald, and I have talked about a lot, because I wanted to, have the freedom to keep preaching the gospel or whatever garbage excuse. I mean, honestly, it's like, I'm going to avoid the truth. I don't want to take a position on slavery so I can keep talking about Jesus. Well, I think if you're talking about Jesus and slavery is an issue and you're not talking about it, you're not talking about Jesus. I don't know what Jesus you're talking about, what fake Jesus you're talking about, but that's kind of always the issue. And so you were just talking about how people in the mainstream media, but this includes Fox, there's
Yeah,
always going to be a
particularly Fox.
continuum. Yeah. Well, there's always going to be a continuum of people willing to. I mean, Fox has been virtually silent on whether the election was stolen, which staggers me. It's as basic as it gets in terms of journalism. The whether J6 was an inside job, unfortunately, they're not talking about that. The COVID thing, silence. This is the time in which we're living. We're just a handful of people, and you've been one of the bravest souls, God bless you, talking about this kind of stuff. Naomi Wolf has been brave. There have been a number of people that have been brave, but it is interesting, finally, by the grace of God, to see some of the truth coming out. To get back to this concept, I am hopeful. I'm genuinely hopeful of what I see day by day happening.
I'm hopeful too, but we can't, I'm very hopeful, but we can't rest. And I do believe in the power of prayer. And if you're wanting to know how to pray, pray that they can absolutely root out these infiltrators, right? Here's what I'm encouraged by. Because, I talk to a lot of grassroots people. I talk to people in every state about what they're doing. And that was what I wanted, one particular area of focus I wanted to hone in on when I started The Absolute Truth, because there's such a, myopic focus on national politics in our world. And really, if we're going to get back to what we were talking about, the roots of our constitutional republic and the ideas of our founding fathers, it's at the local level, right? So I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing at the local level, because people were not as engaged prior to 2020, right? After they had their rights taken away for COVID, and then they realized the election were stolen and they got activated. So that's been a great move in a positive direction. I still see that ongoing, more people involved at the local level. We have a big problem though with our federal government, with our federal agencies, particularly, going back to Russiagate. When you're looking at the CIA, I had been hearing from multiple sources, John Brennan still essentially has operational control because he put so many of these people in place, right? They owe their fealty to him. They're loyal to him. So that's a problem this administration faces. And I can tell you that with trying to create these intelligence products, how much pushback, how difficult it's been, because, certain entities in Intel don't want to be identified as bad actors or participants in any of this. And so there's where there needs to be an area of prayer, because that is going to take very courageous members of the administration, right? You got to have firings. You got to let these people go. And yeah, you might be really low on staff, right? But you're going to just have to do a clean out. So that is something that still needs to happen. And if that starts happening, I'm going to be more hopeful as well. I am hopeful because for once, at least people are understanding the problem. Think about where we were prior to 2020. So many people were blind. We just had no idea. Even working every single day in DC, whether it was at the White House or in Congress or at the agencies, I didn't even know how bad it was. And I was more awake than a lot of the, conservative journalists. I wasn't practicing, access journalism. So I saw it for what it was more than others. And I didn't know how bad it was. So just at least the awakening, the awareness of what is in front of us and the problems that we face is a move in the right direction. And I do believe that Donald Trump totally understands I do believe he understands the problem. He understands how bad it is. He just needs those people around him. He is one person, okay? And I know people get frustrated, and even I do sometimes, right? He is one person. He needs these other people around him to step up and help root this out because people can do it at the local level, but we also have to wipe out the people in these agencies that we've given these agencies so much power, Eric. We've given over our sovereignty to the intelligence community, right? And what is a growing surveillance state, and we have to kick against that.
Well, look, I think the one thing that I'll say is that what gives me the most hope is that Donald Trump clearly knows what's going on, and he is such a poker player. He is not going to say what he doesn't need to say. He'll pretend that no, there's nothing to see here. Meanwhile, I'm sure he has directed his people to be, making copies of things. In other words, I don't think that he or his administration are at liberty to reveal everything that's going on. And so to some extent, we're obliged to trust him. And I think he has given us enough hints from the way that he's talked that he is deeply sickened by what he has seen. And he's instructed his people to do what needs to be done. So I sometimes I think that when we're calling for arrests, I mean, my question is only what is best for the country. And
Hmm.
we want to see arrests, but if it means that, it's almost like if you have a criminal in your sights and you're like putting something in place so that he can't get away. You're doing that rather than arresting him and not knowing how that's going to go. You're sort of trying to
Yeah.
put some things in place. It's my sense that Trump is doing that. At the same time, if it weren't for you and others holding the administration's feet to the fire and saying we want arrests and on and on and on and on, I think both are important. So I'm not too concerned that Trump is, he's not the man he was in 2016. Let's be clear about that. I think they put him through hell, and he's been making notes, taking names, and he is now doing what I think needs to be done. That's my thesis.
He does. I think he knows. I think he's trying to do what needs to be done. I just worry that as in the first administration, there were people who will try to talk him out of doing it. I think overall, there's probably a better group around him, but I can tell you, such as like Pat Cipollone, the White House counsel from the first term, he was so bad for getting in Trump's ear and telling him he couldn't do something and he couldn't fire this person or he had to adhere to this. And I just don't want people around him to talk him out of things. I think that's a possibility. I think there is real concern, like you expressed, and I think it's a valid concern, though I think overall for saving our country, we have to have arrests for true accountability. But there is a concern. I know this, that it will be so overwhelming that it will stir up some kind of unrest or, that because there are global implications that there could be fall of governments,
Well,
you know.
that's the point. I think I would say I don't care. Let there be unrest. There needs to be. I mean, by the way, there will
That's
be
how I
unrest.
feel.
There'll be unrest on our side. I mean,
Yeah.
look, when you have cowards like John Roberts say, "Well, that case doesn't have standing for the Supreme Court to look into whether the election was stolen." That's John Roberts not doing his job, being a coward. It is your job, sir, to call balls and strikes, not to
It is.
worry if the fans will get upset when you call it a strike and they think it was a ball. That's not your job. And if you don't understand your job, you shouldn't have the job. Shame on you. You shouldn't have accepted the job. So when you have people like that saying, well, there's going to be unrest, there will be unrest on the other side. It may be inevitable that there is unrest. Who cares? Your job is to do your job. And this is what astonishes me, Emerald, is that there are people, they only worry about unrest on the left. They don't worry about
Yeah.
unrest on the right, that people who love America are going to say, enough is enough. Friends of mine have been arrested and put in solitary confinement for doing nothing. Do you think I won't be upset? And so the left always has this threat, that we're going to unleash George Floyd du jour riots, Antifa riots, whatever it is. But they don't worry that there could be unrest on the other side, or they kind of maybe they'll
Because
act.
there's usually not, Eric.
Yeah.
Because we're good, Bible believing conservatives who are going to work and doing the right thing, raising our families, and we don't like to cause a problem, right? We've been so ingrained with being well behaved and that, somebody's going to take care of it, and I believe God will, but I also believe that God expects us to step out in courage as well, and speak up. So that's sort of how we've been. So yeah, they're not that worried about us. And January 6th was sort of the sole event, right? Where people did, and they quashed that very quickly because they
Yeah, well,
understand how dangerous it was for them. So they had to make examples of those people. They had to
right,
throw your friends in solitary
right.
confinement to send a message to you that this is what will
Yeah,
happen to you. We can
yeah.
do it all day long. We can
All that
get.
did, Emerald, was radicalize our side by God's grace. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Talking to Emerald Robinson. Emerald, we're just covering a lot of important stuff, and yet we're only scratching the surface on some level.
Yeah, that's so
So
true.
let's go back to COVID and the vaccine. I I think that a lot of this stuff, what we're talking about, it's kind of like it develops, it takes time. In the beginning, there are people like you who will speak boldly. Eventually, information comes out thanks to you, and more people are willing to talk about it. And I think we're at that point now with the COVID vaccine. I mean, Marty McCary, the head of the FDA, yesterday said that the COVID vaccine, we made the COVID vaccine. I'm sorry, that the COVID virus, we made that. That was gain of function stuff. And he actually, this is
Right.
the FDA. So every day, more and more stuff is coming out that people are forced to talk about. I guess the question is, when will the mainstream media? Yesterday, I think MSNBC, CNN, this is their latest gambit to get out of trouble. They are pretending that the real issue is the Epstein story, which they never cared about. And they are pretending that Trump and company are talking about the Russia hoax and this nightmare to distract people from the Epstein thing, which is hilarious because guess what? It's this the opposite, of course. They're talking about Epstein to distract us from the most important thing in our lifetimes, which is people like Obama and Hillary Clinton trying to steal America from we the people. So I guess the question is, what will it take for the mainstream media to begin covering this? And will there be any in the mainstream media who actually will have the guts to say, we got it wrong?
I am less hopeful on that than any aspect of this issue that we've talked about before, because again, it points the finger right back at them. I was just having this conversation with my team earlier this morning. Maggie Haberman was right in there, right, reporting on the Russia hoax. She's so implicated in this. When she was at the New York Times, they won an award for it. CNN won a White House Correspondents Association award, for reporting on what is an obvious lie and is coming out as a lie. So they are so guilty in all of this as well. I think it's very difficult for them to backtrack. And I don't think they will, because if they're all in on it together and if people aren't watching the other information, it's easy for them just to just kind of ignore it, talk about other items, spin it in a way that doesn't hurt what they reported on before. But I don't know. They're now saying tariffs are good, or at least being effective. So that's a step for them. That's a big step. But I just can't see them doing it because they're so guilty. They're guilty parties in the Russia hoax, and basically participated in a coup, right? Because it took the media to conduct the coup.
Well, listen, I mean, I think what I really believe is that we're seeing a cultural earthquake. And in the cultural earthquake, all of these institutions that we took for granted are dying. It's like when
Yeah.
Jesus cursed the fig tree, you're dead. No fruit, you're dead. So now you can wither, you'll take time withering, but you're dead. I really think that the mainstream media is dead, that they're clinging to something. They have no other choice. They see no way out. I think the Ivy League institutions are dead. Their brands are dying. The New York Times is dying. I mean, for Maggie Haberman to be above the fold day after day, printing propaganda, nonsense, lies, in the end, it catches up with you. It may not catch up with them in the way that we would like exactly, but I just think that there has been a dramatic shift, and they're in a death spiral. They don't know how to get out of it. There's no way for them to get out of it. The one way to get out of it, of course, would be to repent, to acknowledge that you were wrong. But, I'm sure someone will do that, but most of them will never do that. So they're just going to go down with the ship, and we
Well,
get
if they did it, it would be like what Jake Tapper is out doing right now as he pitches his book, right? He's out there and going on even conservative outlets and and I don't think they're being hard enough on him. Um, Jake Tapper wouldn't come on my show. But selling his book where he sort of says, oh, well, yes, Biden's senile. And, now we can say it. We didn't really know. We sort of knew, but the White House was keeping it from us. The White House was keeping Biden from us. And so they're now doing they're rewriting history. So that's what we have to watch for them to do, is that in this, they won't ever admit they were wrong. They will never tell the story in its entirety, honestly, but they will, as they're doing with the Biden his mental senility. They will now spin it as a rewrite in history. Well, we didn't really engage in it. We were fooled because the White House hoodwinked us and didn't let us see him.
But I mean, even that it's nonsense, because the issue is not his senility. I mean, the fact is that a dirty deal was made. Let's put our cards on the table. A deal was made. Obama, whoever else was actually running things, said, we'll give Dopey Joe the presidency, and we will actually run the country. Right there, that is fundamentally unconstitutional. We know that that's what happened. We know that Scranton Joe was not running the country. Radical, globalist, pro-China lunatics were running the country. That is a fact. So that's the real issue. So on some level, I don't really care about Joe's senility. That alone. I mean, that basically, ultimately, it's a side issue. We're going to be right back. Final segment, talking to Emerald Robinson. Folks, I'm talking to Emerald Robinson. Emerald, just a joy to have you on the program. What did you do before what you're doing now? Of course, you're the host of The Absolute Truth on LindellTV.com, but where did you work in the world of journalism? What is your background? I should have asked you that in the opening segment to introduce my audience.
Sure. I did go to school for journalism. I first started journalism, though, covering entertainment news, cars, lifestyle, and then I got into science and tech, but that brought me to DC. I didn't originally aspire to be a political or investigative journalist. It found me, and God just kind of put me there. So I was working in DC in science and tech, and then I got to meeting some of the economists, and then I moved into more economic policy. I did some work with Heritage and Cato. I've learned a lot since then on markets. Then I was there. I fell in love. I was stuck in DC, and I figured, well, I'll just get a job because apparently I just thought it was so easy, and I did. I knew One American News back from my days in Los Angeles because they had a lifestyle brand there, a lifestyle channel. So I applied for their weekend correspondent, and then it was just like a fish in water. I mean, I was just really geared for politics and investigative journalism. So I worked at One America, then I went to Newsmax, and then, I refused to stop reporting on the detrimental effects of the vaccines and the development of them, and that got me in trouble. And so Newsmax didn't renew my contract, and I thought, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to do some writing for my Substack, which is at emerald.tv, and do my analysis and commentary and in-depth investigations there. And then about 2 days later, Mike Lindell called me, and he's like, I want you to join my network. Let's make it happen. And I'd never talked to Mike before, but it was funny because remember, he used to go on Newsmax all the time. And when he went on there and he talked about the voting machines one day after they'd been served notice from Dominion, they pulled Mike off air, and I was appalled at the way they did it. The anchor just was so rude. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is the pillow guy. Everybody loves him. And he's right. What are you doing? He's actually right. And so I just tweeted, I'm going to have to buy a lot more My Pillows. I never knew I'd be working for him, but Mike is such a joy to work for. He is just like you see is how he really is. And when you said how you believed, how God saving Trump in that assassination attempt in Butler just showed that God's hand was on all of this. That's how I feel every day working for Mike Lindell. Um, Mike's faith, God honors Mike's faith, and he's being vindicated on a daily basis at this point because he refused to back down from the truth. And it's wonderful to see and be a part of. And I can tell you, Eric, no one has allowed me more journalistic freedom than Mike Lindell.
He's the real deal. He's a hero.
He is.
I absolutely love him. He's just a kind, wonderful, brave person. Let me ask you also, Emerald, was there a point in your life where you came to faith, or were you just raised that way? When did it become important to you?
I was raised that way. I grew up in a holler in Virginia beside the coal mines. My daddy did actually become a pastor of a tiny church that was just across the field from, where I'm from our house. So I was a preacher's daughter. Um, my whole family is just the most God-fearing prayer warriors you will ever meet. And that's, I feel their prayers behind me with everything that I do, and, gives me courage and strength as I do what I do, because it can be tough, as you know. But I will say that I went out, I moved to LA, I kind of stepped away from it a little bit. I wasn't as where I needed to be in my walk with Christ. But through seeing the world, it deepened my faith. Then I became, rededicate myself, become deeper in my walk with Christ. And that happened as I was also moving to DC. And let me tell you, Eric, working in political journalism and in Congress in DC, I saw the true battle, the spiritual battle that it is, that doesn't really often get covered, right? Because it's a spiritual battle as well. And there's so many spiritual, it really deepened my faith and made my walk with God even stronger through everything I've been through in my work. Um, and I met a wonderful man who's a God-fearing Christian. And yeah, with just every trial we've been through with my work has just increased our faith, because God has sustained us and made a way, and it's been amazing. And this is what I'll tell people. I wasn't the likely person to end up in the White House press corps. A lot of those women have, particularly the women have like backgrounds from Harvard or those Ivy League schools that are losing their luster, based on what we know now. And I felt intimidated, but I can tell you that that's God put me there, and He put me there for a reason. And I've always seen it that way in my work. And when He's finished with it, I'll be finished. Like I
That
thought I was, but then Mike Lindell called.
that's the only way to live. And I've said that many times, that folks, you've got to make a decision. Is God real or not? And
Yeah.
if you know that He's real, it changes everything. You really can trust Him. You put your career and your life in His hands, knowing He doesn't forget about you, knowing that He walks with you through the valleys. And it's the only way to fly. And Emerald, I think that there are so many Christians. I think the untold story of what's happening in our country right now is how many Christians on their knees have been praying and praying
Yes.
and praying and praying. Really dedicated Christians. I don't mean, Christ is King, tribalist Christians. I mean people who have a humble faith in God, and they are praying and trusting God every day. I know that is why we've been able to get through what we've been getting through, and why we're going to keep going. I think of people like Dutch Sheets and so many others that I've had on this program, people that really hear from God, and it's what gives me hope. And I'm just so grateful to you that you have been willing to be as bold as you've been, because I think any of us who've been kind of sticking our necks out there have given hope to a lot of other people who are kind of wondering what is going on. They're watching Fox or whatever. They're saying they're not talking about the vaccine stuff. They're not talking about the stolen election. What is happening? And so alternative media has emerged, and by God's grace, good things are happening. So I'll let you go, Emerald. Just so grateful to you for your time. People should check you out, of course, on the Absolute Truth, LindellTV.com. Give my love to Mike Lindell. Thank you so much,
I
Emerald.
will. Yeah, the
Thank
whole crew at Lindell TV loves you too, Eric. And when I said I was doing your show, it was a chorus of, "Oh, we love Eric. We love Eric." So we feel the same about you. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Thank you.